So I just want to thank everybody for coming. We're going to, as a board, introduce ourselves, and we got two of our advisors on the call. So I'll go first. I'm Sarah Allen. I'm the BABJA treasurer. I've been on the board for a little over 10 years now. And I'm going to pass it to one of our co-hosts tonight, Kevin Lynch.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's really an honor to be here with Monte, and I'll be introducing him shortly. So I've been on the board for 4 or 5 years now, I believe, and I am the secretary.
I can go. My name is Tiffany Griffith. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are looking forward to a wonderful discussion. I am the parliamentarian for BABJA this year, and this is my first year on the board.
My name is Kevin Epps. I've been involved with BABJA for a number of years. I'm an advisor, and I'm looking forward to a real candid, informative conversation.
Sean Kennedy.
Hey, I'm Sean Kennedy, and I'm on the board. I've been on the board for about, how long now, Sarah? 1.5 years, 2 years? I'm in charge of multimedia and all the good stuff.
Barbara.
And I'm Barbara Rogers, one of the original co-founders of BABJA, and I am now an advisor to the group.
You know, Barbara could just say, I'm Barbara Rogers, legend. And
Exactly.
Aren't you kind, Monte?
No, you can get away with that. That's you.
Okay, so I want to welcome everybody to this conversation. This is a part of a series of virtual discussions that we're having. And for you guys that like to plan ahead or mark your calendars, we're having our next one on June 24th. We're celebrating Black Music Month. So mark your calendar. We're going to put more information about that on social media. Follow us on Twitter at BABJA 1982, and we're also at Facebook, Bay Area Black Journalists Association. And if you're a member, we'll email you. But if you're not a member, you can also go to babja.org to join. I'd like to welcome all the attendees that if you have any questions while Kevin and Monte are doing their discussion, you can place them into the chat. And if we do have time at the end, we'll try to address them. So please use the chat. And without further ado, Kevin, if you could introduce our special guest.
Yeah, so again, I'm Kevin Lynch, secretary. I'm also a professor at San Jose State. Many of my students are here, so I want to say hello to them and thank you for coming. Monte, I've known for I don't know how many years. I think since the late 1920s when we started in journalism.
Pretty close.
And one of the things about Monte is he is so well respected in sports journalism that when Monte enters a press box, everybody knows everything's going to be okay. Monte's here. Everything's going to be okay. And I did work with Monte at the Oakland Tribune briefly, and I just wanted to tell this quick story. So I'm not I'm a hard person to edit. I'm not the best writer in the world. I have good ideas, but sometimes the execution falls down. So this was in the Don Coulter days, Monte. I'm sure you remember. Yeah. So Don Coulter, who was my sports editor, he would tell me all the time, read Monte, read Monte. Monte is the standard when it comes to writing, when it comes to putting together things that are coherent. Wow. So I think that is very true. So Monte, I'm going to let you talk about what you're doing now, a little bit about your background, and maybe you should start with where you grew up, and then your influences in terms of getting into sports journalism.
Sounds good, man. Sounds good. Grew up in Oakland, Castlemont High. Spent most of my childhood in East Oakland and had some good times. Brookfield Village, which is where Damian Lillard is from, and as Dame always represents Brookfield. I know Brookfield because it's where I grew up. It's still, the home I grew up in is still there, and it wasn't that long ago. And from there to San Jose State University, graduated there, and I've been lucky, man. I started there I had a job for a bit, then I quit, and then I went to school and finished school. And in my first semester, I went to Chabot College for 4 quarters, and then I transferred to San Jose State. And right before I transferred, I got a job at the Oakland Tribune working part-time once a week covering high school sports. And they liked what I did enough to where they kept me on for another year as a part-timer, as long as I was going to school. And then in 1985, what it would be, March of 85, 2 months before I graduated, the boss comes to me and says, hey, we have 2 openings. And if you want one of them, it's yours. However, I know you have another 2 months of school to go, and I can't guarantee those openings will be there when you graduate. So think about it for a couple of days and tell me what you want to do. I thought about it for like a day and said, screw it, I'll take the job. So therefore, the last 2 months of my senior year at State, I had 18 units in San Jose, and I had a full-time job in Oakland, and I didn't sleep. But when I graduated, I didn't have to send out a resume. I had a job, and this is why I say I'm lucky. I've never had to send out a resume in my entire career. And the Tribune went through changes in management and ownership, and for some reason they kept me on. They kept me on and kept me on. And the last change in ownership and management, I didn't feel the vibe anymore, and we saw where the newspaper industry was going. And I still had my column, which I had for 20 years, but an opportunity came for me to go to work for NBC Sports, and that's where I am now. And the initial job was Warriors Insider, which means a lot of Warrior stuff. And they sold me on it by saying, you know what, we think the Warriors are going to be pretty good. I know they've been really bad for a long time, but we think they're going to be good pretty soon, and we want to raise our profile and do more stuff. And that was in 2013. And boy, next thing I know, the Warriors were really good. So, and I've been with NBC ever since. So this is my 8th year, and I could be on for another year or two. I don't know how long I'm going to do this, but I'm enjoying it. So that's the thing. Now, what has been added in the last year, we're doing a show called Race in America, A Candid Conversation. And I'm the regular host. I occasionally have a co-host, but I'm the regular. And we did a show every week from the week after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. We've done a show every single week, and until 3 weeks ago. And with the return of live sports full force, we got the A's going, the Giants going, the Warriors going, the Sharks going. Our resources were stretched thin enough to where we can't do it every week anymore. So now we're doing it on a case-by-case basis. We want to do at least 2 a month. And the first one of April, we did like 2 hours ago. And so you can probably imagine what we discussed. I had on John Burris, the noted civil rights attorney, and Dr. Vernon Andrews, who studies the way police deal with the Black community, and specifically the way they deal with Black athletes. And his book has just come out in the last week or so. It's called, I think it's Black Athletes and Policing, or Policing and Black Athletes. And he gets into, everything from what happened with Rodney King and how it affected Black athletes. He talks about the history, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, John Carlos, Tommy Smith. And he also talks about Colin Kaepernick, of course. So it was a good show, a good conversation with guys who have been in the trenches and they know how this thing works. So that's been fun, and yet it's been informative. I say fun because my idea of fun is to be informative as possible, while at the same time letting people know that we do enjoy what we do. I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy it more when I feel like I'm really sending out information that people should have. Not everybody wants to hear it, but so that's what I'm doing now. And there's no plan that we'll do another show next week, another Race in America show next week ahead of the NFL draft, and talk about some issues that that are pertinent to people of color and the NFL draft, and NFL ownership and some in their mindset and those kinds of things. So that's where we are now. I'm Warriors, I'm Bracing America, and I'm doing whatever I can to keep things going and try and illuminate people and let people know that, is there a fight? Hell yeah, it's a fight. But we have to do what we can to make this little planet that we have as good as we can while we're here.
And Monte,
it's a lot, I know. We're very long-winded, but hey.
No, that's what we want. And I think you are showing all of us exactly what you do in terms of giving us pertinent information that we can use through sport to go about our daily lives. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, how did a candid conversation come about? And what was your role in bringing that about?
Yeah, one of our associate producers, David Tedla, it's his idea. And he came to me, he said, you know what? He says, there has to be a way we can tie sports into this George Floyd stuff. And I said, I agree. Athletes are speaking out. You saw Steph Curry, you saw LeBron, you saw Carmelo, you saw Chris Paul, you saw guys speaking out across various sports. And I thought, yeah, there has to be a way. So we went to management and weren't sure what we get, whether they'd be receptive or not. But they said, let's go with it. And I think one of the reasons they said it, and it wasn't a hard sell at all, is because at that time we had no live events. You know, basketball wasn't happening, baseball wasn't happening, it was not football season. Sports were shut down to the pandemic. So this was a way to have something live that people can look at and hopefully learn from. So my role was to be the host, and we brought in initially I had a co-host, Logan Murdoch, who is now at The Ringer. We've also had Tremaine Lee, who works for MSNBC on the East Coast. He's been a co-host. So, and from there we took off. We started the week after George Floyd, and that was early June, and we've gone ever since. And George Floyd died on May 25th last year, so we will do a show. We're planning a show for May 25th this year as a 1-year anniversary. And obviously a lot of things have happened since then. So that's the genesis of the show. And we've had on people from every sport: baseball, basketball, hockey, football, soccer. We've had sports.
Monty, you're muted.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know how I did it. But anyway, yeah, we had Steve Kerr's been on. Gabe Kapler, the Giants manager, has been on. Not only did Gabe Kapler come on, after we did the show, he said, hey, I enjoy what you guys are doing so much. Here's my number. Call me anytime you want me. I'll try and make it. So, you know, it's good to have him on. We've had Niners on, Raiders on, Warriors, A's. So, but we've also had politicians on. We had Eric Swalwell on. We've had, what I'm trying to do now, and I haven't been able to do it just yet, is I want to get a police officer on. And we haven't had a police officer on. We've had, John Burris has been on a couple times. So we want to open the door to all these possibilities. And also, you know, it's not just about Black. You know, there are other races who deal with these things. And we had Jeremy Lin on about 2 months ago, and obviously discussing Asian American violence and violence in the Asian American community. So we had an academic on who wrote a book about basically the new Latinos and got into the business about that and what that means for the future. So we try to make it as well-rounded as possible, but the main thing is we want to try and educate people, because some of the things that we talk about are things that people don't really want to get into. And we had Emmanuel Acho on, who wrote the book, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Well, Emmanuel was, you know, a great guest, and he's going to be, I guess, he may be the Bachelor host at some point. I don't know, but anyway, former football player who is now doing well for himself. So the show is expansive, and again, the goal is just to try and educate people and open the forum, because we've discovered, and Barbara can tell you this, there are conversations that are being had now that weren't being had a few years ago. And you look at, for example, you look at what happened to Rodney King in Los Angeles. That was in the mid 90s, early mid 90s. And you look at what happened in terms of that case. And you saw the evidence. We saw this guy get his butt beat by 4 police officers. And you thought, oh my God, this is awful. This is, and then we saw the outcome and we thought, they could just do that. And so that is why people were so uncertain about what was going to happen this week. And because you think, yeah, we all saw it. We know what it should say. We know what happened. And we all saw this man die because he was under a man's knee for 9 minutes and the man was saying, I cannot breathe. Still, you don't know. You don't know what the jury's going to do. You don't know what America's going to do because we've seen America get it wrong for so long. So again, our goal is to educate and just get into these issues and open the forum.
And obviously, George Floyd with the verdict, I wanted to ask you just right off the top, and I know you just did a show on this, but what has been the athlete reaction and to this verdict?
There was a measure of relief. There was some relief, but mostly, and this is how I feel too, mostly there is an uncertainty about where we go from here. We don't know what this means. And this was a case that was so blatant. Steve Kerr yesterday said, how could you look at that and not come away with any other conclusion than the man was murdered? Well, because some people don't want to see that, don't want to acknowledge that. So there will be other cases. There have been other cases. I mean, a teenage girl was killed in Columbus, Ohio by a police officer 2 days ago, just after the verdict was announced. So these things continue to happen. There are 2 things going on here. We have policing and the way that we are policed as a community and as a society, and how different it is based on what you look like and your skin color and your ethnicity. And there's also the athlete's role in this, and whether or not, you heard the term shut up and dribble because some people want athletes just to stay out of politics. Never mind that athletes have always been in politics, and politics often come to athletes. Ask Jackie Robinson if he were still around. If Jackie Robinson were around now, he'd tell you that, yeah, it's all a part of the deal. Look at Jesse Owens, 1936 Olympics. The hero of the Olympics comes back to America, and Jim Crow is waiting for him. He represented this country. And he comes back to America, and there are certain parts of the South where you can't stay in this hotel, boy. You can't walk in this restaurant, boy. And it doesn't matter that he has gold medals hanging from his neck. It doesn't matter. So it is always political. They claim victory because Jesse Owens was the star of the Olympics. And look at that. He told those Nazis he gave those Nazis what for. And he came back to America and, people loved him, kind of. And other people like, he's one of them. One thing I got to say, though, and it became clear last year, is that the George Floyd case is different from all the others in that the reaction was not just limited to the Black community. And that's huge because in the past, there have been so many instances of these violent incidents with police where Black people were killed or otherwise maimed. Rodney King survived, but he got beat pretty good. And people looked at that and said, that's a Black problem. That's their issue. They got to figure out a way to get that. Well, when you look at the way demonstrations went across the board last summer and into the winter, and in some places still going, you saw everybody out there. You saw every ethnicity represented out there, and you didn't see it just in the cities. You saw it in the suburbs, Walnut Creek. You saw it in Salt Lake City where people thought they were demonstrating in Salt Lake City. Yes, because what happened was so egregious that people were like, no, we cannot tolerate this. Beyond that, you saw statues being toppled in Europe. This thing was global. And so it's different. And that's why I think there is a reason to have some hope that maybe, what we've been looking for centuries, and getting it very, very, very incrementally, maybe this is the next step. You don't know, but when that verdict was read, I think that's where people went. That's where athletes have been talking about it. Okay, this was good. We got this, but now where are we going to go from here? What happens now? And I think that's a valid question to ask.
Well, and that leads right into my next question, in that we see these things happen. Of course, we saw Floyd happen, and we saw the protests, and then it dissipated. We have the verdict now, and what's going to happen in a month from now? And what can athletes do? And not that it's all on athletes, but it seems that because they're so in the public eye, that maybe athletes can keep this conversation going when it starts to dissipate. Do you see any of that?
Yeah. Well, now it has dissipated in some places. It's still going in Portland. It's still going in Washington, D.C. You still see it in L.A. You still see it in certain parts of the country. But you're right. It's not as broad as it was 8-9 months ago. But I don't think it's going to go away entirely at any time, because it's been embraced. There's more coordination now, and the problem is that you have people who co-opt the demonstrations and try and turn them into riots. And there's a difference. There is a difference. And whenever I hear somebody say, "Oh, those demonstrators are out there rioting," I'm like, no, they're not. The people who are rioting are not the demonstrators. They're rioters. The demonstrators are out there doing something. They have a purpose. The rioters, their purpose is different from the purpose the rioters have. The rioters' purpose is to destroy and to tear up stuff. The demonstrators are trying to make a point. They want to be heard. They're screaming to be heard. And occasionally, yeah, that can spill over into violence. But a lot of times that violence is, guess what? It's initiated by the other side, by the law enforcement side. And you saw it in Washington, D.C. It was really bad, where peaceful protests would be peaceful, and then here come the police, and then they would be not so peaceful because the police would do things to make it not so peaceful. So it's a long fight, but athletes have a place in this, absolutely, because they are public figures. They have a forum. Steph Curry can say something. He can get Dr. Fauci on the line. He can get Barack Obama on the line, and he can talk. He can call Trump, as he did a couple of years ago. Somebody said, is Trump an asset? He said, well, the first 3 letters, So, these guys can say these things and express themselves in a way that make people listen. Now, is it going to be, there's going to be some division. An example being the Utah Jazz issued a statement after the verdict was read on Tuesday, supportive of the verdict, and saying that basically that we saw what happened and the verdict was just and it was right. And here we are in Utah. Well, some of the fan base did not like the statement because they're racist. I don't know any way to put it. I mean, I saw some of the responses to their statement. And I thought, this is monstrous. Basically people are saying he deserved to die. He deserved to die. And somebody referred to him as, hey, it's okay. You guys are going to defend this piece of trash, referring to George Floyd. And so there's awful people out there, and you're not going to get rid of all of them. There'll always be awful people. And so athletes and sports teams, sports figures, whether they're athletes or coaches or managers or owners, I think have an opportunity to hear them, to make themselves heard. And I think they should take it every time they realize that they have something to offer that can make it a little bit easier for all of us. And some of the guys do speak up. And I think it's always great to hear when Steph or LeBron or somebody steps up and says, when Colin Kaepernick spoke up, you remember what that did? I mean, people, he disrespects America, he hates America. They weren't paying attention. They didn't care. They did not want to hear his message. He never said that. In fact, he said the opposite. I love America. I want it to be better. But they made it about the flag and about the military without bothering to do any homework. The reason why Colin Kaepernick knelt is because he consulted with a Green Beret, Nate Boyer, who said, this is what we do as a sign of respect to our fallen people. We kneel. And Colin said, okay, I can go with that. And he went with that, and still, NFL said, we don't feel so good about this. Our fan base might not like this, so, and the man hasn't thrown a football in 4 years now. So obviously we have a long, long way to go, but athletes have always had something to say. Muhammad Ali he went from being one of the most hated men in America during the Vietnam War because he would not go to war. As he put it, Viet Cong never called me nigger. The man won an Olympic gold medal, 1960. He came back to Louisville, Kentucky, couldn't go to any bathroom he wanted to, couldn't go to any restaurant he wanted to. There have been stories that he tossed his medal into the river, but then there was dispute about that, whether he did or not. But the bottom line is that Ali stood for something in ways that are really hard to do. And over his lifetime, he went from being a hated man in America to becoming one of its most beloved because he was always on the right side of history. But people didn't want to acknowledge that back then. And so you look at a guy like Colin Kaepernick, he's on the right side of history. And it's been regarded in many quarters. The man has gotten awards and honors from places all over the world. Amnesty International, they recognize what he's doing, what he stands for, what he means, what his intentions are. And yet he's still being vilified by a certain segment of America. So this tells you that, is there a place for athletes? There has been, always will be, whether it's Jackie, Muhammad Ali, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, Colin Kaepernick, there's always a place. And the key is that athletes don't get so comfortable with their money that they understand, hey, you know what, you got yours, but let's try and remember where you came from. And that's been one of the issues that some guys have because they don't want to get involved. But there are guys who will stand up and see the injustice and say, we can't live with this, we can't handle this, we don't like this.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I also wanted to throw out there was the role of women, the role of the female athlete. And always, when we see social movements, many are started by women, and that seems to get lost. But I don't think there's been a bigger or a louder voice than the Williams sisters, than the WNBA. Have you dealt with those issues, and what is your reflection on those issues?
The WNBA, and we've had on WNBA players on the show too. The WNBA's influence last summer was massive. They stood up even before the NBA guys did. They were in solidarity, and when they recognized that they had a team co-owner who was an outright racist and a bigot, they made it a point to get rid of that person, and they did. And so the Atlanta Dream now has a co-owner who is a former Black WNBA player, whereas a year ago they had a co-owner who was a white racist. So that has turned. And so the WNBA was just some of the demonstrations they made, some of the signage, some of the language that was used to try and change the discourse and make it more positive. They were instrumental in what happened in Georgia, whether it was the election in November, when Georgia turned blue, when Biden was able to beat Trump in a place where Trump thought he had in his back pocket, or even in January when they had the runoff election and Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff were both, Warnock and Ossoff were both voted over in positions where people thought they would never be able to get into. Stacey Abrams, she's been a queen, man. She's been a queen. And so you look at what she's done in Georgia, and it should be an inspiration to any woman, Black, white, yellow, red, purple, green, blue, whatever you want. It should be an inspiration to any woman who wants to make a difference, because this woman got jobbed out of being the governor. She should be the governor there. And she had it stolen from her by some phony election stuff going on. And rather than saying, you know what, they beat me, she said, okay, all right, I see. I got something for you. And look what she did. So it's inspirational, man, to see what some of the women are doing out there and the way they are affecting things to try and make this country a better place for them, for us. Women lead the way, man. Women lead the way. They lead the way.
Yeah. And just a related question in terms of that. I mean, I know the WNBA, the Williams sisters, when it came to getting equal pay for athletes at Wimbledon, the women as well as the men, they used to pay the men more, even though the fans watch Wimbledon women more.
Yep.
And one of the things I think that is happening both with men and women, and this maybe started with the Williams sisters in Wimbledon, is we're not going to play. The NBA saying that, the WNBA saying that. If you don't listen to us, we walk away. That seems to be the big difference between, say, activism in the 60s and the 50s and activism now. And how does that impact us and impact the whole situation when athletes say, hey, you better listen to us or there will be no games?
Well, yeah, it actually did happen back then too, because people realize you got to hit them in the pocket sometimes, in the pocketbook, and therefore there were places, especially in the South, where people quit riding buses. Okay, we can't say we want to sell the bus. We won't ride. Guess what happened? Okay, all right, you can ride. You can sit where you want. Okay. Rosa Parks Dam. Okay, fine. You can. All right. We can't eat in your restaurant. Okay. They had sit-ins, and then they had demonstrations in front of the restaurant. So there are always ways to let people in power know that they're wrong. And one of the most effective ways has been, yes, to withhold services or to hit them in the pocketbook. And when you have a situation like you have in sports, where literally you're right. Equal pay has been an issue for centuries. It's always been a case where the white male was always at the top of the scale, and everybody else was down there, whether it's black male, white female, Latino male, Asian female, whatever. Everybody else was somewhere else down the spectrum there, because, hey, America was founded on violence by white men, and God damn it, it's going to stay that way. And so you look at what women make versus men in general, and it's like pennies on the dollar in a sense. So it is really a situation where when you see people of influence like Venus and Serena, when you see a Megan Rapinoe, when you see these people speak up and talk about the importance of equal rights for women, I think it's huge, and I'm totally behind it, because again, I think I long for the day we have a female president, because I think that's a huge step, and I hope to see that. I think, it's been done in other countries. We've seen female prime ministers in other countries, but America, we always got to be different, and we got to be last to the train station. And so it is what it is. But you're right. When you withhold services, or you decide you're not going to dance for them, sometimes they listen to you, and I think that's what's happening in many cases now.
Right. I just wanted to shift gears a little bit. One of the things that we want to do at the Bay Area Black Journalists Association is get people of color into journalism and into prominent positions in journalism. What suggestions would you have? We have a lot of students here. What suggestions would you have for someone, particularly a person of color, a woman, in terms of getting into journalism, and in terms of how do you negotiate? And Monty, you probably have done this your whole career. How do you negotiate being from where you're from and your point of view into what we've traditionally seen? Sports is still dominated by white males, and in terms of press boxes, editors, publishers, the whole bit. Well,
here's the problem that we have now. You look around at most of your TV outlets. When I say TV, I'm also including streaming and everything, and the video world. And you see more black faces. You do. The problem, unfortunately, for people who are aspire to be journalists, are that most of those black faces are former players. I mean, they get a lot of jobs. You look at ESPN or anywhere you go, at NBC Sports Bay Area, anywhere you go, if you see a black face, it's probably going to be somebody who played baseball, basketball, football, hockey, or something, because that person becomes an analyst. It's an easy transition from playing the game to discussing the game. Now, writing the game is not as easy. And that's where you have to have, to me, you always have to have three things going. You have to have a deep desire for sports or news, or both. That's one. Two, you have to enjoy the process of gathering information and turning it into something that people can digest, whether it's by writing it or by talking about it on a radio or in some audio format or video, TV, streaming, etc. And the third thing is that you have to be committed to getting better every day. It's a grind. I mean, and there are times when you won't like the job. I mean, Monday, I didn't like my job Monday morning because the circumstances conspired, and I was like, this was not good. This sucked. But then it got better, you know. But you have these moments, and Kevin, you know, I mean, if you ever covered a team, you know, there are moments when you go, why am I doing this? You know, and so, but for me, it always came back to a love of sports. I played every sport when I was a kid, and at some point, my knees gave out on me as a teenager. They're back now. Thankfully they returned in adulthood. But for 3 years, I had what they call Osgood Schlatters, which I could not even get signed off to participate in PE. So therefore, no doctor would let me play in any sport for 3 years. And that pretty much sent me another direction. And even when I was playing before, my parents wouldn't let me play unless my grades were up. And I was a pretty good student, so that helped. But for me, it's about the love of language and about telling a story and about informing people of things that you think they might want to know. And the writing part for me is, I won't say it's easy because it's not. Sometimes it is because something gets you so fired up, so gets you going, yeah, that you feel like, hey, I can preach now. I can preach. Give me my 800 words. Let me go. But then there are days when you go, okay, I gotta bring it. I gotta find a way to bring it, even though I don't feel it, because most of us, what we do best is what we feel strongest about. And when I've spoken to students in the past, I've always said the same thing: find out what you love, and then find a way to get paid for it. It sounds simple. It ain't always simple, because some people actually have a hard time figuring out what they love. But once you identify what you love, and for me, sports was it. And so I grew up reading the newspaper. I used to read the sports page, not the comic strips when I was a kid. You know, that was me. And I read sports biographies. I read books. And this is the nerd in me, but when I was a kid, we had encyclopedias. I used to read the encyclopedias for fun, just out of curiosity. You know, I was curious. And you got to be curious. That's part of the journalist's job. It's being curious and wanting to get information that sometimes people don't want to give you. So for me, it's those things, man. You be curious and chase what you want. Be willing to work, because it's going to take a lot of work. But above all, if you love it, find a way, because, you know, it's not only journalism, but there's also, you know, public relations jobs out there. And sometimes those public relations jobs pay, you know, pretty good pennies. So there are other options. There's photojournalism still. There's video journalism still. There's now the podcasting industry it's blown up. So there are a lot of avenues in which you can get out and become a part of the media landscape. But yeah, for me, having been in it now for 35 years, yeah, I've done a little bit of all those things. And for me, it always comes back to writing. That's been the part of my job that I like. When I was in college, I thought at first that I wanted to do TV and radio. And the more I learned, the more, you know, I really enjoy this writing part. I really enjoyed this. And then I was able to do a little bit of both. And so now I do both. But you talked about influences earlier. The first person who got me on this path is Ralph Wiley. And if you don't know who Ralph Wiley is, you look it up. Ralph was a serious journalist. And Ralph, I read Ralph when I was growing up in Oakland. He worked for the Oakland Tribune. He was a black sports columnist at a time when, there weren't many of those. And I think he might have been the first. I know he was the first around here, but I think he might have been the first in the whole country, talking about the late 70s, early 80s. And I read Ralph. And Ralph later went to ESPN, or Sports Illustrated, and then ESPN. And, he's a noted author. And if you read Ralph, you fall in love with it because he had a gift. And every time I get an award for something that I've done, I always bring his name into it because I tell people all the time that Ralph Wiley was a 400 hitter. It's baseball terms. He was a 400 hitter. I'm hitting 280. Okay. And that means I'm going to have my days. But Ralph was a guy you go, whoa, this dude, yeah, he was special. And we lost him about 15 years ago. But nobody influenced me more than him because he was the first person who told me I could do this. I could get to this position and do what he did. And he left the Tribune in 1982, about 8 months before I started there part-time. So I didn't work with him. I got to meet him later, but I didn't work with him. When I started working there covering high schools roughly 8 months after he left. But yeah, look up anything Ralph has ever written and you go, whoa, this dude was special. He had a talent, man.
Well, and that's something I wanted to follow up on. With Ralph, as he got further on into his career, he became more he was, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Monty, and certainly Barbara, he seemed to not care as much about what people thought. He was going to get his opinion in there. He was going to have social justice in there. No one was going to stop him from doing
I don't think Ralph really
that was all of it. I don't know that that came later. I think that was the whole time he felt that way.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Ralph knew that some of the things he wrote was going to piss people off. He knew it. And I knew it too. I knew when I wrote some stuff I was going to piss people off. But it goes back to how you feel. You got to write what you feel. And you got to write what you see and what you hear. You put all the things together and you think, okay, this is the story. And my thing is I always ask myself one question. When I go down a road that might be considered controversial, I always ask myself one question. Can I defend what I'm going to say? And if I can do it, then I write it. If I can't defend it, I shouldn't say it. It's pretty simple. So yes, there have been times when people called up the newspaper and, had some choice words for me. And there have been times when, there was one time when I learned a lesson early in my career when I wasn't a full-time columnist, but I wrote a column about Muhammad Ali. And I learned a lesson. And well, I got to go back to the beginning. I was working the copy desk, which means you're editing stories, writing headlines and stuff. And a man named Henry Winston, who was a boxing promoter, called me up one night because I covered some boxing. And he said, in Henry's voice, "Monty, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing headlines on stories. Henry, how are you doing?" He goes, "I'm doing great. Hey, would you like to have dinner with the champ?" And I thought Henry's BSing me. Who? Okay, Henry, which champ? The champ. Henry, what do you? Ali. I go, when are we going to do this? Right now. So I put the phone down and I asked the night editor, I said, Henry Winston's on the phone and he says he's having dinner with Muhammad Ali and he wants to know if I can go join them. And the night editor, a guy named John Simmons, said, "Go!" So I went and I was in Oakland, downtown Oakland, and they were at a Vietnamese restaurant called Pho 84. It's still there. And it was, Henry was with Ali and probably 5 or 6 other people. And I shook hands with Muhammad Ali. And I sat with them at dinner. I didn't eat, I just observed and conversed with them. Again, this is my second year on the job. I'm full-timer for 87, I'm full-timer now. And I spent an hour or so with them. And so I thought, I got back to the office and John said, "Well, how'd it go?" I goes, "It was awesome." It's Ali, man, it was awesome. And he says, "Well, do you have something to write about?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, well, we can't take it tonight, but write it tomorrow and we'll run it. Okay. And I wrote, and here's my thinking at the time. I want to put people at that table where I was with greatness, with a legend. And some of the details of what I wrote struck a wrong chord with some people. And I learned that honesty is an important part of journalism, but people don't always want to know that their heroes are human. And this is Ali was beginning to feel the effects of Parkinson's. And that came through in a column that I wrote that, that he had some difficulty feeding himself, basically. His hands trembled. And when I got to the office the next day, the clerk said, man, I've been looking for you. I go, what? He goes, here's your messages. They had those little pink slips with paper with your name on it and the messages. He had me a stack of pink slips. And there were probably maybe 1 out of every 3 was like, wow, that was an awesome piece. 2 out of every 3 were like, how dare you talk about Muhammad Ali that way? And I'm thinking, why did I do this? And I thought, yeah, they didn't want to know that their God was human. And so the lesson I learned was, be careful when you start to talk about someone who is so exalted. Be careful how you present that person. There has to be a measure of delicacy to it. There has to be a certain level of skill in getting across what that person is like without making them seem less of a person or less of a legend. And it's really hard. It's really hard. But it's one of those columns that I'll never forget because the reaction was massive. And there were, people who in the journalism were saying, oh, that was really awesome. I can't believe you're able to sit there and have dinner with this guy. And wow, it was special. I go, it was special. I said, but it was eye-opening. And in some ways, people didn't want their eyes open to what I saw. And that's what I learned.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Obviously we all, Father Time is undefeated. And we all, legends, we think are immortal, but we're not, they're not. So obviously that's something that has to happen. One of the last things I wanted to ask you, and then maybe we can get people to contribute to the chat, and then and ask Monty some questions. We also want to be respectful of Monty's time. Monty, if you feel you need to go after an hour, certainly do that. We would love to have you.
Let's roll on for a bit.
Okay.
What time we got here? If we can go on to like 7.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's when we're going to end too. So I really appreciate that. This is a delicate question, but a question that needs to be asked. And I know I don't want to put Black people in the position of answering for all white people, but because sports is so white, is so male, what do white males need to know? What should they be reading? Should they be reading James Baldwin? Should they be doing things and learning about history, about the Black community, in order to cover athletes fairly, with context, with history? What suggestions, and again, I don't want to have you teach me what I should be doing, but if you do have suggestions about how, white males aren't going away in terms of sports journalism and in terms of positions of power. Hopefully we're getting more diversity, but it's going to take a long time. So what message do you have?
First of all, education is always a good thing. I think as we know that racism always comes from a place of ignorance. That's where it begins. And the more you learn about a culture, about a people, the better you are at being able to understand that culture of those people. You don't have to be that, you can't be them, but When you say read James Baldwin, hell yeah, read James Baldwin. Read Ralph Wiley. Read Ta-Nehisi Coates. Read these people who are able to express themselves and let you and inform you about what's really going on in ways that are that might open your eyes and teach you something that you didn't already know that you probably should know. I talk about these things with Steve Kerr, who is one of the, and here's what the way he puts it is that it's easier to empathize with a person when you know their plight. Steve grew up all over the world. His father was an educator and was assassinated in 1984 in Beirut, and Steve lived over there for a while. And so his view of the world is a little different from a lot of people because he gets it. You see Steve marching. You saw Steve marching last summer. And he understands the need for solidarity and, as we call it these days, allyship, or even the next level, which is, co-conspirator, you might say, someone who not only will support you, but will be alongside you as you go on this journey and will be participating as much as you are, and there's always been those people. Dr. King had those people, and they've always existed. When you look at the murders of the voter registration murders back in the early 1960s, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. You had a Jewish guy, white guy, black guy killed, 2 Jewish guys. And so, there's always been people there who saw what should be happening and saw the injustice that needed to be dealt with. And so I think the more people learn, the better equipped they are to become a part of the conversation. Nothing's worse. First of all, if somebody's committed to being a racist, they're irredeemable. There's no point in discussing or arguing with David Duke. He believes what he believes. I mean, if somebody said you want to have a debate with David Duke, why? Pointless. But if you're really interested in learning about this country and you are interested in wanting to see this country become a better place, then yeah, pick up a book or 3 and learn not just about Black culture, learn about all the cultures. Pick up something about the Asian American culture, the Asian culture, the Native American culture. Learn about that because let's face it, we've had it bad for 400 years. I mean, we had slavery. Native Americans didn't they got pushed off into a corner and said, here's where you can live. And in many ways, they were slaughtered. So, we've seen Asians being placed in facilities because there was wartime. And so therefore you go to a camp and you got to stay there. We've seen Latino Americans being restricted to certain jobs and being told they couldn't do this, can't go there. And thank you for Cesar Chavez being able to get them to unionize, in these things. So we've all had a journey to make and a place to go to get to a higher level, but we can't do it alone. And that's why I think what happened last summer and what's happening even now in a lot of cities is encouraging, is that the George Floyd incident took it from being a Black thing to an American thing. And we have people who are out there in the streets. I mean, there are many demonstrations where you look and the majority of people were not Black, and that was rare. That was rare. In the past, it was always, 80, 90% Black. Well, there were instances where it was a total opposite of that, where the majority of the crowd was not, the vast majority of the crowd was not Black. So, and some of these people wanted to be out there to show support, but some of these people out there were out there because they understood. They read enough and learned enough and experienced enough to understand that when a culture among us is better, we are all better. We're all better, and so as long as you have one culture trying to suppress others, we can't ever be equal and we can't ever be better. We can't ever really progress. And so the term liberal and progress, I like the term progressive because to me, that's what it's about. It's about progress. Liberal, okay, but to me, there's a difference between a liberal and a progressive. And to me, it's important. The term progress is important. And when I look at Stacey Abrams, for example, I don't know if she's liberal, but I know she's a progressive. She is doing what she needs to do to take us to a place where we need to get to, even as people try to fight her against it. And so, yeah, for people who want to know about their country and about cultures that they didn't grow up in, learn. It's out there. It's out there. Now, if you don't want to know, then don't bother. But if you want to know, you got to equip yourself and you learn, and that makes you gives you a better chance of being able to convey what's going on in that community. And so to me, that's the main thing, man. You got to learn, whether it's Baldwin or Wiley, whoever it is. But and again, there are books, but you got to be able to listen and empathize, because there's been a lot of books written in the last year that deal with this very subject, and I think most of them have something to offer. But you get to pick the ones you want to go through and learn from them. But the main thing is, you got to be receptive to wanting to learn these things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One last question. I know I lied before, and then maybe we can get to the chat. If you're here and you want to ask Monty a question, please go to the chat and we can pick out some questions for Monty. The thing I find, and I watch the show all the time, the thing that really struck me was Jeremy Lin.
Which one?
Jeremy Lin.
Oh, Jeremy, yes.
Yeah, and what he said, his level of empathy, off the charts. Just tell us a little bit about that interview and what he had to say and how you reacted to it.
Yeah, well, Jeremy, we got him on the show, and as we all
Monty,
know,
let me just interrupt just for a second, because I think a lot of my students might not. Jeremy Lin, if you don't know, Asian American basketball player.
Linsanity.
Linsanity.
Yeah.
There you go, Stephen. You got it. So pounced on the scene. Has been an NBA player for a long time. Went to Harvard. Grew up in Palo Alto High, and Linsanity. Monty, I'm sure you can explain Linsanity.
Linsanity was Jeremy was playing for the New York Knicks, and he had an insane 2 or 3 week period where he was hitting game-winning shots and just burning people and tearing up the court. He was cooking people, and so in New York, the tabloids there, they have a way with words, man, and they came up with the word Linsanity, and it stuck because it's New York, and it told you just how much people appreciated what he's able to do. You're looking at an Asian American basketball player, which you just don't see, and this kid went out there and he ate it up, and he did things that people didn't think he could do, and he's still playing the game now. And so, but he's becoming more of an activist, and we had him on the show, and he said a lot of profound things. But to me, the most profound thing that he said in the show, and this is a guy who's Ivy League education, so he's not a guy who just came off the streets. But Jeremy said one of the things that he's learned is that not all people who claim to be anti-racist are really anti-racist. He said, you can't be anti-racist if the only racism you acknowledge is that against your community. And I was like, yeah, that is right. If you're Black and you hate racism, but you don't care what happens in the Asian American community, then are you really anti-racist? If you're Asian American and you say you're anti-racist, but you don't care what happens in the Black community, are you really racist? And so that stuck with me. And I was like, I understood that, but he put it so succinctly. And I was like, yeah, you got to ask yourself, do I hate racism enough to acknowledge that it happens in other communities that are marginalized, other communities of color? So, and at the time, we were looking at these incidents, and they're still happening, where literally Asian Americans were being attacked for just being there. and some of these people, elderly people being attacked by young people, some of these young black people attacking Asian American older people. What, why, what for? And we had, I'm sure most of you know, well, you probably know both of them, but Mr. Fab and China Mac, two hip hop artists. Mr. Fab is an Oakland dude, and China Mac, New York, LA. But the two of them got together and addressed this as a couple. Mr. Fab from the black perspective, and China Mac from the Asian perspective, and they basically wanted to let people know that there's a solidarity to be had there. And I think Fab just wanted them to know that, hey, you know what? I stand with you, and we stand with you. And China Mac was like, no, we need you, bro. We need you, bro. And so, again, that's two communities that have felt the sting, and sometimes against each other, that have felt the sting of racism, and making an effort to try and bridge that gap there. And again, it requires an acknowledgement beyond yourself or your community. It requires you knowing that our people aren't the only people who deal with this stuff. And so that's empathy, that's understanding. And to me, it really, the bottom line is character. If you have character, you want good things to happen for everybody. You don't wish bad on anybody. You don't hate. But as we all know, there will always be haters because haters be hating. Always. There's always going to be some haters.
Yeah, right. Unfortunately. Sarah, do you want to pick out anything on I know Barbara had a question.
Yeah. Okay. Monty, Barbara wanted to know, you have been covering and speaking out about inequality in sports specifically and in America in general. What would true equality look like to you?
Wow. It would mean that we don't have these conversations anymore. I have friends across the spectrum that I communicate with all the time. And my parents were like this too. My parents had people coming. They had friends, white friends. They had Hispanic friends. They had Asian friends, or as they said back then, they had Chinese friends or Japanese friends, white friends. They had them all. My dad worked was working in the government. He was Army guy, so he had friends across the spectrum, and they all came to our house at some point or other. So I grew up with that. And I retain that. And so now, when somebody says, well, who have I been talking to the last 10 days? I can go through my phone and I can find everybody represented there, and we all acknowledge that we may not be of the same race, but we all acknowledge that, we all know that we're equals. We know that. And I have white friends who I would trust with my life. I have black friends that, I gotta look at, So it's not just about color, man. It's about character. It really is. And so I have, to me, if you get to a point where you don't describe a quarterback as a black quarterback, okay. We're still doing that, that's still a thing, the black quarterback. Or you don't talk about, wow, where is black ownership in sports? Well, you know what? Guess what? It's coming. It's coming now. You're starting to see it. Derek Jeter, A-Rod, LeBron, you're starting to see these guys recognize the power they have in terms of getting to the top. They're making so much money now that they're looking at investing in sports, which is a wonderful thing because, let's face it, sports ownership, it's a hard club to crack. And it's almost entirely white in every sport. And so when you have a chance to get in, Michael Jordan is the only sports team owner who's black, and he's Michael Jordan. So that's where it took. He's Michael Jordan. And so he got in. But you got Magic Johnson with the Dodgers. You have guys they don't have a large percentage, but they're getting in. The door is open to these guys. And I think that helps. I used to work with a business writer named Brian Johns, and Brian used to always say, man, it ain't gonna ever be right until we get our own stuff. And what he meant to say was that when we have our own teams in sports, then it'll be different. When we have our own businesses. And by that he was saying that not just that they're not separate businesses, but that they were equal businesses. When the black-owned bank is looked at the same way as the white-owned bank, then we've gotten there.
Mhm.
Then we've gotten there. And right now, people look at banks and, yeah, there are some ethnic banks, but are they perceived as the same as traditional banks, B of A, Wells Fargo, yada, yada, yada? Probably not. So that's the thing. If you buy into economic prosperity, that's where you want to go. Now, I also have some friends in my daughter, she leans the other, she's like, I won't say she's anti-capitalism, but she has her moments, where she's like, this is never going to be right. And some of what she says is right. It's always going to be a struggle. But the way that this government is right now, and will be for our lifetimes, is that it's built around economic clout, prosperity, power. And the more that you get, the more of a voice you have. And you're seeing that, and to me, that's why it's important to have Black ownership. So yeah, it's one of those things where, to me, equality is when we don't have these conversations anymore, and where you don't say, well, wow, look at sports. 98% of the owners are white. You can then look at it and say, well, wow, we've got representation all across the board here, because anybody who's worked at a place for any length of time will tell you that the more representation you have, the more potential you have to open doors to more people, to reach more people. And I think there's a resistance to that in some quarters, and it always will be, but that's why we keep fighting.
Great.
Okay, Paul Limson wanted to say, good evening, Mr. Poole. You mentioned that you would like or have been trying to have police on your show. What are some of the questions you would like them to respond to, or what type of conversation would you like to have?
Well, here's what I want to have, and I was hoping to get a cop on the show today, and we weren't able to do it. I think police departments right now are being really kind of careful and selective as to who they talk to and what subjects they address, because they're under siege in a lot of places, and they put themselves there. But I do know of a police officer in the Bay Area who was a former pro athlete, and he is Black, and I wanted to get him on our show, and I still would like to get him at some point if he gets clearance from the powers that be at the police department. But I want to hear what they have to say about what's going on, about the good cop, the one bad apple theory, and just, how can we change policing in America to where it isn't so blatantly racist? Because in so many instances it is. And I say this as someone who, if I tell you my 10 best friends, 2 of them had careers in law enforcement. And we get into these things all the time. And they both had careers in law enforcement, but they have different viewpoints on some issues. And so what I'm saying is that, for me, if I get a cop on the show, that's what I want to focus on. How do you navigate being a Black man as a police officer? We all know, well, if we don't know, we probably should know that police departments really kind of were rooted in slave patrols. That's where it started back in the 1800s, 1700s. And so, and a lot of people today will tell you that if you're a police officer, I can't work with you. Kamala Harris, she's a cop. She's a cop. And so they don't care what she looks like. She's a cop. And my thing is that it can't be easy. It can't be easy unless you totally buy into the whole prison industrial complex. And if you do that, then it's distasteful. It is. And so But I want to, yeah, that's what I want. Any cop, but I would prefer a cop of color, whether he be a black cop or an Asian cop or a Latino cop, just to be able to get their point of view on what they have to deal with and how they do their jobs and the mindset they have to have, knowing that they work among people who wouldn't like them if they weren't cops.
Monty,
They may not like them even as cops.
we've hosted LaRon Armstrong before. Lieutenant, but he's still a friend of BABJA. Maybe we could talk offline. I know that he's very busy being the police chief now.
He's open, he's very busy. I'd love to get LaRon on the show. Yeah, man.
He might be willing to. We could talk offline about that.
Okay, absolutely. Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, the Bay Area seems to be at the center of some very historic athlete protests, with the one at San Jose, from the John Carlos and Tommy Smith, who went to San Jose State, and obviously Colin Kaepernick, who played for the 49ers. And the Warriors have been also very instrumental. Do you think that playing in the Bay Area has influenced these athletes over, the historical, like the Bay Area has always kind of set the tone for civic unrest and social issues. The way that we respond is a lot different than how some of the other parts of the country respond. Do you think being an athlete here influences their desire to mix their influence as an athlete with their disdain for what's happening in society?
I think what happened, because we are a pretty educated region. And I think what's happened is that I think Colin Kaepernick, his awakening occurred in the Bay Area. His awakening. He's a biracial kid. He grew up in the Central Valley out there in Turlock. Went to school in Nevada. I think he learned who his adopted parents are white. I think Colin learned who he is once he got to the Bay Area and got around people who could explain to him what things were. The Colin Kaepernick who got here as a rookie and the guy who was here 5 years later were a different dude. And he learned about himself because he was around people, he was around academics. He wanted to know things and he was curious. You grow up curious, you have no relationship with your father. You have no relationship with your birth mother. There's a curiosity that's going to be there. And so he wanted to know more about who he is and about his culture. And the more he learned, the more aware, or as they said back then, the more woke he became, as they said then. And he read about things. He learned things. That is where it starts. Tommy Smith and John Carlos, at San Jose State, they learn things. You work with Harry Edwards and people like that, you learn things and your eyes are open maybe to some things that maybe before you didn't pay close attention to, or in the case of John Carlos, he paid attention to it, didn't like it, but didn't have an outlet. And he became a world-class sprinter. And then, Mexico City comes along and now he has an outlet, a place to show how he feels on a massive stage. So I think the Bay Area I can't say that we are liberal. I think we are relatively liberal because some places are so backwards to where they can't be anything close to this. But you look around San Francisco, you also know that it's not as liberal as people think it is. Take a look around. It's not as liberal as people think it is. The perception is one thing, the reality is another. So I think people recognize that. Bruce Maxwell played for the A's. He was the one baseball player who knelt. The one. And it took him almost 3 years to get back in the big leagues. He had to go to Mexico and play. And we had him on the show. He has no regrets because he was standing for what he believed in. But he had support among some of his teammates. But again, he knelt because he wanted to draw attention to the same sort of things that Colin did, which was police brutality, inequality, and injustice, and these things that we deal with on a daily basis. But I think the Bay Area has been instrumental in these people becoming more aware of what the world is like, and just listening to the academics we have here, you know, whether it's the old school academics like Dr. Harry Edwards or the younger guys, you know, Amir Loggins, who also teaches at Stanford. And so, I mean, they're both firebrands. You know, Dr. Edwards was a firebrand in his time, and, you know, he was a quote unquote troublemaker. And if you hear Dr. Loggins, you know, he's the same way. We had him on the show. We had to bleep him out a couple times. So, but their message is the same, in the sense that it's about understanding your Blackness and what it means and what you can do with it, and how to use it in a way that educates people and helps society become a better place. That's the goal.
Okay, we got one more question from Rocio Lara. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. Hello, Mr. Poole. Can I hear your thoughts and opinions on the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2021? Do you think this will be an effective bill for police reform?
Oh boy. Well, here's why I am on these things. I think it's well intended. I think it's a step in the right direction, as we say, but we don't know if it's going to work. I think reform is really complex. It's really complex to do. And so when people hear the word defund, some people think, well, that means no police. No, that's not what defund means. They mean different policing and different allocation of resources. That's what that's about. And you shouldn't have police officers coming to deal with mental breakdowns. People who are having an emotional moment, and you know, they lose it for a minute. You don't want to have cops respond to that, because they come with guns. And I read just today, I read about someone who is proposing that police officers be taken away off of traffic duty, and that you have a separate group of people who deal with traffic incidents, not police officers, but these are people who deal with not parking tickets, but like speeding or whatever. Fine, but you don't deal with, you don't have cops do that. And I thought, okay, I can kind of see where that would help. Let cops deal with crime, real crime, you know, not the guy who made an illegal right turn, you know, real crime. And because as he pointed out, this person pointed out, so many of these incidents that turn out tragic happen because of a car stop. It's a car stop, and it goes bad. And what he's trying to say is that let's reduce the number of car stops by police officers by having a separate group trained to deal with traffic situations, trained to deal with these things. Now, will that stop people from, will that get rid of the old driving while black? In certain areas, probably not. I happen to think that some people can be reformed and others cannot. So when I hear the term reform, I think, generally speaking, it's a great theory. Is it real? Can it really happen? I don't know. I mean, I saw the training video today of a guy who trains police officers, and some of the things that this guy was saying are frightening. I mean, he basically said it's cool, it's okay to kill people. That's not protecting and serving, but that's what he's telling police officers. It's, you know, hey. And so that's when you go, what the heck? This is how we got where we are. People who look at us as less than human. And that's the thing. I don't know that the bill will change mindsets. You know, I think it will help, because I think where there's a law, it usually helps. You know, there's the gun discussion, gun rights, gun control, and people say, well, you know, they can always get guns anyway. But my thing is this, it's like, yes, it's true. You can always get a gun if you want one bad enough from some illegal way. But that doesn't mean you can't have a law that's saying it's illegal to do it. And to me, it's the same as when somebody says, well, you can always get a gun, so what's the point of having a law? It's like saying, well, you can always speed on the freeway, so what's the point of having a speed limit? Because you have to have some point where you say, this is wrong. You have a speed limit there to let people know that this is what we think is safe. You have gun control laws so you let people know that this is what we think is a place that can get us to a safer country. America is the place where we have almost every day, several times a week for sure, you can count on it, a cop killing somebody that's unarmed or a mass shooting. It doesn't happen anywhere else. It happens on the regular here. So yeah, it is. Anytime you can make progress, and that bill does, that bill does, I'd love to see the bill go through because it's a sign of something better tomorrow. But it still has to become a reality. Cops have to buy into it in their own way. And I want to say cops, I don't mean the street cop. I mean at the highest levels, because that's where people have to be able to toe the line. I think there are some progressive police chiefs in America, but I think there are also some very regressive police chiefs. And I know there are some police unions that are just outright corrupt and dangerous. So it's a culture, and the bill can't change the culture, but it's a step that lets the culture know that we want change.
Absolutely.
Kevin, you have any other questions before we wrap up?
No, I think that what I would like to do the most is just thank Monte and for his, Monte's got such a great way of relating complex concepts very simply and with emotion, and that's great. Monte also has a lot of knowledge, and he can combine that with his experience and give us some wisdom, which I think is what happened tonight. So Monte, really appreciate you coming on, and I really feel like this was a valuable hour and a half.
Monte, do you plan on, what are your plans once you decide you don't want to be on the grind anymore? You're going to be a teacher? You'd be a good instructor.
I did some teaching before, and I liked it, but I'm not sure I loved it. You know, I'm not sure on the regular, doing that on the regular, I'm not sure I could do it. If somebody said, can you teach a class this night? Sure. But can you be there every, twice a week? I don't know. And I'm not convinced that I have that much to offer on a regular basis. So,
not true.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the idea, but I've never written a book, and people always ask me, you should write a book, and yeah, I think that's what I would like to do is dive into the book world, and I have ideas. I've always wondered, I always told myself, I need an idea that can sustain me, because I lose interest in something and I move on to the next thing. I need an idea that can run on for several months at a time. And if I get that idea, then I can turn it into a book, because I can focus on that one thing or that one topic. And I got a lot of friends who've written books, and they all say the same thing, that, yeah, it is a process. It can be frustrating. It can be infuriating, but hopefully in the end it is rewarding. And so that's what I like to do.
Well, Monte, we had a lot of students on here, and a few of them want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and giving us your time from the BABJA.
Thank them for being here for us. Yes.
We truly appreciate you. Hopefully we can do this again, maybe in person next time.
Yeah. In fact, I haven't been down to San Jose State in a while, my alma mater, so I should go down there again sometime once we get back to semi-normal life. So, and we're headed that way, it seems like. So hopefully next semester, maybe get down there and see what's going on, because I haven't been down there in a bit.
That would be
fantastic.
We'll host you. Well, we want to thank everybody. We're going to wrap up again. Please